G'day, folks. Thanks for stopping by. You can catch these kitchen table chats every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on freethinkradio.com. Or if you miss the live broadcast on Freethink Radio, you can catch them here on our YouTube channel. Thanks very much, and hope you enjoy the chat. Thank you very much, Lawrence McCurry, for taking the time to talk to me today. Lawrence is an independent writer, staff writer with Your Ward News in Toronto, filmmaker, media critic, and all about troublemaker around town.
Oh, you got it right. Exactly.
I told you it would be better this time. So, and so we're going to have a chat today about Your Ward News, the history and the current goings-on there, and also just the stories around Toronto, the province, and the world a little bit.
Major strangeness going on around me today.
Oh, well, I saw there was a little bit of an update during the week with your local politics as it involves your newspaper.
My editor's a busy boy these days. He's running against the Attorney General in the Ontario elections. He figured the Ontario General or the Justice Minister for Ontario went and charged him with hate crimes, so he'd run against him in the election. He's also running against John Tory for mayor of the City of Toronto as well. So he's a busy guy.
Sounds like it. On top of dealing with the stream of litigation that is thrown the newspaper's way.
Well, that's it. You know, the lefties, they use the courts like it's their plaything. So, you know, they have a tendency. When I say they, in this particular case, I'm talking about Warren and Lisa Kinsella, who are backroom operatives for the Liberal Party of Canada. And of course, they throw all these slap suits at you. With the idea being that you're going to be spending so much time in court and so much money on lawyers that they're going to bankrupt you. And, it's their way of trying to put a newspaper they don't like, who says things about the Liberal Party that they don't like, out of business. And it's not going to happen. We're going to fight them tooth and nail right to the end.
Yeah, I was really happy to see when I read the editor's note in the latest issue of Your Ward News that it's not being discouraged or intimidated or set back at all. But I also read Lisa Kinsella's little, press statement on why she wouldn't be running for city councillor.
That just came out this week too. I think what happened is she realized that the people in that ward in the Beaches all realized that she's nothing more than a cheap political opportunist, and that she didn't have a hope in hell of getting elected. And that's why at the last minute she decided not to run, because she did have the endorsement of the outgoing city councillor. And oddly enough, she used us as an excuse not to run for city council. You know, I'm so busy trying to put this nasty newspaper out of business, I just don't have time to run for city council. Yeah,
and I mean,
that's
almost a direct quote from her statement too. I was really, I was almost surprised that she.
It's an excuse. It's nothing more than a cheap excuse.
Yeah, it's absolutely a cheap excuse, but I was still even a little shocked that she, carried the crusade to that level to use it as a scapegoat, basically, for why she couldn't run.
They're using our newspaper as an excuse for all kinds of political douchebaggery. First of all, they go around calling our publication, that hideous Nazi rag, right? And we're by no means a Nazi rag, okay? We don't endorse Nazism. Your Word News is sort of a cross between gonzo journalism, alternative media, and Mad Magazine. It's a satirical publication, which means we publish funny cartoons and alternative media stories that you're not going to hear anywhere else. The kind of stuff that the controlled corporate media refuse to report on.
Right. So, maybe we'll just back up there for a second. So Your Ward News, you can find it at yourwardnews.ca online, the present issue as well as back issues, and along with some YouTube videos that the editor and, is it just the editor? Mr. Sears, I think? Anyway, there's some YouTube clips up there as well.
Sears. He does a lot of the writing for the paper. I do a lot of the writing for the paper. We've recently picked up a couple of new writers. So, yeah.
And if you check out the web page and the issues that you can find posted there, you'll see right away, like Lawrence said, it's definitely a satirical focus. I like the Mad Magazine comparison because the graphics work is very Mad Magazine reminiscent, but
we
definitely
recently
edgier.
got a new graphic artist. Our last graphic artist, Robert James, great guy, but he went crazy. He had some mental issues and took a snow shovel to the editor's car.
Oh dear.
And I don't know what's going on there. Something about invisible camouflage and being at war with the Russians. But we replaced our graphic artist, and the new guy is just as good. And we're still publishing. We not only publish online, but we also put out 350,000 copies on a quarterly basis. That's hard copy newspapers that we deliver to people's homes around Ontario.
Yep, old-fashioned newsprint.
Exactly.
But yeah, so you picked up with Your Ward News about 3 or 4 years ago now?
A couple of years at least, yeah.
Okay. And so they had started off already when you came on staff as a writer, as a local paper, right?
Time. Your Ward News has been around for a long time. It was originally published by our publisher, who's still our publisher, Leroy St. Germain, who's an 80-something-year-old Métis fellow. Now, Dr. James Sears came along and took over as editor of the newspaper, and when he did that, he changed the format. It used to be, a local paper that was put out in this one little ward in Toronto. And when James Sears took over as editor, he changed the format. We started doing things a little differently, and we expanded the distribution of the paper. Though Leroy St. Germain is still our publisher.
Right. So when Sears started editing, that's when you started doing more national politics, national stories, provincial.
Exactly.
Right.
Before, the focus was more local. Not to say that it wasn't politically biting. It first came to my attention years ago when the paper started publishing stories about their local city councillor who was involved in a corrupt land deal in the beaches. And it caught my attention because these guys were Leroy was publishing stories about this corrupt city councillor that you weren't seeing in, the Toronto Star, the Toronto Sun, and the Globe and Mail, and it wasn't being reported on in other places. And, it made a difference to politics locally. But when James Sears came along and took over, it was a lot more fun, The format of the paper changed. We started doing these zany cartoons, and it was a lot more controversial. And really, that's when the problem started. Well, what happened was originally, this was just before I started writing for the paper. They published a picture of Pierre Elliott Trudeau in a Nazi uniform, which isn't that far of a stretch because when Trudeau was in college, there's a story that he rode around Montreal in a Nazi uniform on a motorcycle. So it wasn't that far a stretch from reality. But there was a Jewish postal carrier who refused to deliver the paper, saying that it was a Nazi paper because it had this picture of Pierre Elliott Trudeau in a Nazi uniform.
Right. Well, probably
and
having no concept of the context of it.
Exactly. And that's what's, the thing was, too, is we're an anti-Marxist publication. So, you could say that we're right-wing. And in this day and age, it's dangerous to say you're a conservative or a right-wing thinker. Anybody who's anywhere right of Marxism these days is called a Nazi, which is ridiculous.
Right. And I mean, it's basically if you don't toe the progressive line, you get called far right. I mean, it's you're either far right or a Nazi, or you're on board with.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we started calling out this postmodernist, or as they called themselves, progressives, agenda for what it is, which is a reworked form of Marxism, cultural Marxism to the extreme. And I think people are starting finally, after all these years, are finally starting to, see this left-wing lunacy for what it is.
Right, and it's funny too. Well, it's not funny, but it's not a coincidence, I guess, that
it's so dangerous.
Well, right, and as this has become more in the public eye, more talked about on mainstream media, the newspapers come under increasing attack as well.
Well, let's face it, the media is tightly controlled in Canada. I've been a critic of the mainstream corporate media for years. Our newspapers and our radio news and our television news in this country is highly controlled. I used to have a friend who produced segments of the Fifth Estate and various news magazine shows. And, this was even long before I started writing or got into political activism. And this is about 10, he's dead now, but this is about 10, 15 years ago. He turned around to me and he said, our media in Canada is more controlled than it is in communist China or the Soviet Union. That's back before the Berlin Wall fell. And he said, our media is more controlled in Canada than it is in the Soviet Union or communist China. And this man was in a position to know. He was high up in corporate media. And right. That's the state of it. The media lies to us. And they're not all big whopping lies. They're lies of omission and lies of spin. And I think people are starting to wake up to the fact that newspapers and newscasts in Canada, like the CBC, like the Toronto Star, just can't be trusted because they're lying to the public in a major sort of way. And as I said, they're not whopping lies; they're lies of spin and lies of omission. Stories don't get reported on or get underreported. Or the spin that they put on stories, influences the way people think about what happened.
Exactly, and you even see it between mainstream media sources, like the Jordan Peterson, when he first started getting a lot of media attention, was a good example because you could see the CBC piece that they kind of led with when he started opposing Bill C-16, and it was heavily edited footage of the protests he'd been at and very heavy spin. And then you could watch him on The Agenda with Steve Paikin and see a totally different side of that was just unreported by CBC. So
Well, one of the things that made Jordan Peterson popular in the first place is that people like you and me and Greg Renouf, for example, shot that first film where he was at a protest at the University of Toronto where he first spoke out against Bill C-16. And, it was people who are shooting these YouTube films on their phones and posting them to the internet, that really made Jordan Peterson who he is today. Because people started paying attention to what the man was saying, not because he was promoted by the mainstream corporate media, but because people started paying attention to him on the internet.
Yeah. Well, and isn't it funny, too, like I was saying earlier, like we've been hearing a lot about YouTube and Twitter and all these big social media platforms cracking down on independent journalism. And kind of the same way that we see, local politicians and media and government trying to crack down on your ward news.
Well,
basically the same kind of journalism.
In a meeting in Europe a couple of months ago, Justin Trudeau had a meeting with the head of Facebook and basically turned around and said, you have to do something to keep your fake news in check or we're going to legislate you.
Yeah.
I'm doing an interview. Call me back. So, of course, the phone rings and it just throws off my trail of thought.
No worries. But, so let's get back to so the big thing that your ward news is facing, aside from these kind of petty attacks from, local...
Well, we've got a whole slew of things that we're fighting. Everything from somebody who attacked one of our paper boys and then charged him with assault to Warren and Lisa Kinsella, who've charged our editor and publisher with libel and threatening charges, saying that they were threatened, and they're holding up an article that was written in the newspaper as the so-called threat, which I find shocking. How do you threaten somebody and then send it out to 350 homes, and say, oh, that's a threat to our lives? Well, anybody could go to the story and read it and clearly see that it wasn't a threat. So, really they're just trying to waste our time in court. But also there's the hate charges that, here's the thing. This all goes back to the Canada Post hearings.
Right.
Warren and Lisa Kinsella got their little group of cat ladies and Antifa together and decided that they didn't like because what happened was we did a story at one point on Warren Kinsella, and it was written by Shep the Talking Dog, who wrote a story called Why I Get No Lefty Love from Warren Kinsella. His talking dog basically told some truths about Warren Kinsella and then said he was going to go over and lay a turd on his front lawn. Well, Warren got all upset about that and decided he was going to close the newspaper down. Started publicly ranting about us being a bunch of Nazis, because Warren Kinsella wrote this hack novel about, low-hanging fruit Nazis back in the old Heritage Front days. And then wrote another one recently, which he's trying to promote. And the way he's trying to promote this book, especially in the Jewish community, is by coming after us, telling the Jewish community how much of a threat we are, right?
Right.
So Warren and Lisa Kinsella started this campaign against the newspaper. And at first, it was complaining and, write your local MP. And at the time, our paper was being distributed by Canada Post through bulk mail. And, first they complained to the government saying, oh, you shouldn't be delivering this in the mail. And every time the Canada Post lawyers would hold back the paper and look through it and finally say, well, there's nothing here that's, could be considered illegal or hate speech. We have to deliver it. And finally, they went to Judy Foote, who was the minister in charge of procurement in the post office, and she signed a letter, an order, banning our publisher and our editor from using Canada Post, which means if these guys even wanted to send, a Christmas card, they'd be arrested for it. And of course,
which is unbelievable that you can have your personal access to a federal government service revoked.
I agree. And we decided to appeal that. And so the government started these hearings, which are obviously costing the taxpayer millions of dollars, because it's certainly costing us a lot of money to hire lawyers, to appeal this hearing. Now, what happened was Judy Foote, the minister in charge of the post office, issued this order, and then by the time when we appealed it, she appoints this 3-judge panel of hand-picked people that she selected who are going to adjudicate the matter. And then when it looked like, this panel was going to rule against her, she resigned from office. And one of the problems was the panel said, hey, you didn't give us good reasons for coming to the decision that you came to. So she resigned from office. Of course, she said it was because her granddaughter had cancer or something. But, basically, I think what happened was, she screwed the pooch on this one, and the powers that be decided that, whatever. I'm not going to get into that.
Right, but so that's...
She resigned from office, right?
Right, so that's what left you with holding the bag, basically, with Canada Post.
Well, we continued with this hearing, and basically, we fought it on constitutional grounds. And, the board issued a statement basically saying, that we pretty much won the argument, but they're going to go on with the hearing so all the cat ladies and Antifa guys can all have their say about how evil they think we are. But when Canada Post made that statement, the Justice Minister of Ontario decided to lay hate charges against the editor and the publisher. And this is supposedly hate against Jews and women. So 50% of the population we supposedly hate, which I'm sure came as a big surprise to the editor's wife.
No doubt.
Yeah, no doubt. So now we're dealing with those hate charges as well, and the threatening charges from Warren Kinsella and the libel charges from Warren and Lisa Kinsella, and it's ridiculous. It's
right.
just like,
so
for
I mean,
example,
really,
with these charges that the Kinsellas laid, the paper came out and they said, oh, they threatened us in this article, and they went to the police, and the police said, no, they didn't. So they went to a Crown attorney, and the Crown attorney said, nah, there's no threat there. So then they went to a senior Crown attorney, and the senior Crown attorney said, I don't see it. There's no threat there. So then he went and swore out private charges with a justice of the peace, and when they do that, then the Crown has to follow up on it, whether they want to or not.
Right.
And, it'll be going to court soon, So, I mean, it's ridiculous. And they've done everything they could possibly do.
To bog you down in litigation until it's...
Well, yeah, that's the idea, right? To bog us down in litigation. And meanwhile, they got their little group of concerned citizens, or as we call them, the Cat Lady Brigade, together.
Right.
And they're Antifa thugs, who started vandalizing the newspaper office. They threw bricks through the window so many times we had to board up the front of the office. And then they started spray painting graffiti all over the office, obscene things and all kinds of. Oddly enough, they spray swastikas on the front of our office. Now, you go spray paint a swastika on a synagogue, and you've committed an evil crime. But they do it to us, and everybody applauds. I just don't get it. Right?
And for some strange reason, that's not a hate crime.
No, when the left spray paints a swastika on your front door, that's not a hate crime. But do it to a synagogue or a church, then it's a hate crime. So, there you go.
Well, so what kind of response have you had from the police, like dealing with all of these kind of frivolous complaints made against you, and then dealing with the threats and the vandalism as well? Like, have you found them responsive, or?
Well, we don't call the police for every threat that we get.
No.
Like, is the paper offensive? Yeah, it's offensive, sure. Of course, people are going to find something in there offensive. I find stories in the Toronto Star that I read offensive. I find
the Huffington Post offensive.
Well, I find those flyers that my local politician slips through my door very offensive. But you don't see me calling the police every time my local MP slips a liberal flyer through my door. But they go out there and they start telling people, if you get this newspaper in your mailbox, call the police, lay a complaint, and they're wasting police time and efforts, right?
Right.
But these people calling the police, I mean, a reasonable, mature person who gets something in the mail that they don't like just throws it in the recycling bin. Line your birdcage with it, wrap a fish, right?
Yeah. You put it in your cat litter. Like.
Well, see, here's what's happened. We're living in a day and age now where you've got people like Warren Kinsella and the Liberal government telling people, you should not be offended, And the truth of the matter is that there's no law that says you can't offend somebody. Being offended is not more important than somebody else's freedom of speech. But the liberal left seem to think it is. That it's more important not to offend somebody than to take away their freedom of speech than not to offend somebody. And that shows a basic lack of maturity in people.
Absolutely.
And I think the left fosters this basic lack of immaturity.
Yeah, well, it's part of what is, usually called victimhood culture, right? And I mean, part of always nurturing that victimhood is just a big sign of immaturity in a lot of ways, right?
Well, that's what this postmodernism is, right? And basically, let's face it, what it is it's a reworking of Marx's theory. It used to be that Marx originally said, you've got the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Well, that didn't fly in the West. So what they did is they came out with this oppressor and the oppressed. And anybody who's the oppressed, should complain against the oppressor. Basically, it's, this whole postmodernist crap is just a reworking of Marxism. I mean, do you have a right not to be offended? No, of course you don't have a right not to be offended. If I say something or I write something that you find offensive, too goddamn bad. Don't read it. Don't listen to it. If you don't like what I'm saying, turn this podcast off.
Yeah.
If you don't like what I write, throw the newspaper out. You don't call the police and try and close the newspaper down. But people seem to think that they've got a right to do it. If they're offended by it, then you don't have a right to read it either. And basically, that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, and it's almost more sinister than that in some ways, because I don't think it's the majority of people who even share that sentiment. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I have yet to see any major community-based petitions or efforts to have your ward news shut down. It's just a very...
There was a petition that they started online. And the funny
okay.
thing is that most of the... I actually did a story about this. It was started by a woman named Kellyanne Fairchild. And she started this petition. She's a Facebook friend of Warren Kinsella's.
Okay.
She started this petition to stop your ward news. And the funny thing about it is that, you know, she didn't put like a link to our website in the petition. And most of the people that signed this petition were from areas that don't even get the paper. These were people in other countries and other provinces who'd never actually seen the paper that signed this petition. You know, just because she says it's a Nazi newspaper, you know, they all jumped up and signed the petition, even though they'd never actually seen the newspaper.
Well, exactly, and that's what I was getting at too. I mean, it's just this kind of clique, you know, of progressives, liberals, Marxists, whatever, you know, and so I mean,
refer to them as Marxists because, in our opinion, that's what they are.
Right, and so it's not. It's like manufactured outrage. It's not as though the community at large is really concerned about this or actually feels like it's a threat or it's a problem or a nuisance or any of those things. It's, you know, it's a small group of control freak Marxists that have decided what's good for everybody.
And you know what? That's a very good term, and I think it's the first time I've ever heard it. But that's exactly what it is. It's manufactured outrage.
Absolutely.
That's exactly what it is.
Right.
And, you know, the funny thing is we've had a lot of people that, you know, like I'll be having coffee with my editor somewhere, and you know, people walk up to us and, you know, sort of look around, make sure nobody's looking, and bend over and say to us in a really quiet voice, "Hey, I really like your newspaper, man. Keep up the good work." But they're afraid to say, "Hey, I'm with you." And that's what our society has come to. Our society has come to a whole bunch of people who are afraid to speak out for their rights because they're afraid of these Antifa goons that wear masks and beat people up. You know, they're afraid of losing their job for saying the wrong thing or thinking the wrong way.
Exactly. I mean, it's intimidating enough, I think, for most people to actually go out publicly, you know, and support these kinds of things or even defend them because there's a track record of violence from counter-protesters like Antifa and all these loser commies, basement dwellers. And to support something online, people are intimidated because they'll call your boss, they'll call your family, they'll, you know, it's and it only takes hearing a few stories like that where people have really had their livelihoods and their reputations destroyed.
Well, you know, it's funny you should mention that because somebody, I had an article come across my desk this morning, something that was published today in the Montreal Gazette. They were outing this guy who lives in Montreal as being one of the writers who writes articles for Daily Stormer, okay?
Okay.
And they published, and this is in the Montreal Gazette, they published this guy's name, where he went to school and who he is, saying, oh, this is the guy that writes under this name for that racist website. You know, and Daily Stormer is a Nazi website, right?
Yeah. But,
you know, my attitude is that if people want to be Nazis, they should be allowed to be Nazis. You know, I
to know who the Nazis are, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, I don't have to agree with it, but I mean, I don't agree with these transvestites going into kindergarten classes either. You know, but you speak out against that, and you're going to have people calling your boss, and you know, you're going to lose your job, and that's wrong.
Yeah. Well, and it's exactly.
So is doxing somebody for being a Nazi in a major, metropolitan newspaper. In my opinion,
Yeah. Well,
the Montreal Gazette had no right to out this guy for, like, even if it's true, even if he is the guy that writes articles for Daily Stormer, I mean, the guy's a writer. There's been people that have been writers that wrote under pseudonyms, because they've got to pay their rent.
yeah.
I write for Your Ward News. Does that mean that? Now, I use my own name and I come out and I do it publicly. But let's assume I was writing under a pseudonym, right? Does that give the Toronto Star the right to out me and put my life in danger? And it's crazy. It's insane.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of yellow journalism. I mean, it seems like the media, or the mainstream media, the more they're kind of faced with their obsolescence, the worse they get almost.
Trudeau's talking about subsidizing newspapers now. And to me, that's such a hypocritical move. He wants to, he knows that a rag like the Toronto Red Star there are hurting for money because nobody wants to read their lies anymore.
No one wants to read another love letter to Kathleen Wynne, you mean?
Exactly. And he's talking about subsidizing, newspapers and periodicals, that agree with the Liberal Party. Yet at the same time, he's trying to close us down. If that isn't, first of all, if a newspaper can't make their rent because nobody wants to read their rag, I shouldn't be paying for it with my tax money. No. We give our paper away free. And, we haven't had advertisers in there since Antifa started strong-arming anybody who took an ad out. Which is what they did, by the way. When all of this first started, they went to everybody who was advertising in our newspaper. And most of them were, small businesses, right?
Right.
Who couldn't handle these Antifa jerks coming into their business and threatening their customers. So they pulled their advertising. And what really irked them is we kept publishing anyway. And first they drove away all our advertisers. We kept publishing. They vandalized our office. We kept publishing. Now they're dragging us through the courts, and we're still publishing, and we're going to keep on publishing. And if they close the newspaper down, I'm going to keep on writing the kind of stories that I've always written about government corruption.
Well, that is probably, that's the best news ever, right? That's the attitude that has to answer these kinds of idiots when they try to basically bully someone out of publishing things they don't like, right?
No.
I think it's very fortunate that that you have the resources and everything to keep going, and I hope these lawsuits, I'm sure they'll be dragged on probably as long as humanly possible, but I hope no
newspaper in history, as far as I know, have ever been bullied and intimidated as much as our newspaper has, and yet still kept publishing. So, to me, that's a badge of courage that I think my editor and my publisher should wear proudly.
For sure. I agree. But so we're just about to come up on an hour soon, but there's just a couple other things I wanted to get to before we wrap it up. I read the latest article by Shep the Talking Dog earlier this week, and I just want to, I'm behind Shep. I hope he gets his, dogs deserve a minimum wage too. I thought that was a great human, or I should say animal rights piece.
Well, it's funny because somebody was talking about Parkland in downtown Toronto the other day.
Oh, and, really?
I went back and I read an article that Shep the dog had written about this sky deck that John Tory. Now, here's an example of the kind of stuff our newspaper publishes. John Tory came out with this multi-billion-dollar plan to build a deck over railway lines in downtown Toronto for a park, because downtown needs another park so badly that we got to spend billions of taxpayers' dollars on it. And Shep the Talking Dog did a story that the only reason Tory was building this Skydeck Park was for a developer friend of his who was putting up 2 office towers that would be totally inaccessible without, building this land over top of the railway lands.
Right.
Which a private company couldn't appropriate, because the air over these tracks actually belongs to the railroad. And only the city could possibly appropriate this land.
Right.
So Tory comes out, and that's the kind of story. That story was not picked up by any other news agency about this collusion between, private developers and the city. And they're selling this parkland to the taxpayer, saying, "Oh, the people of downtown need another park," and don't even mention that the real reason why they're doing it is for this office building development. And we were the only people that covered that, and no other news agency. And that was a Shep the Talking Dog story.
Yeah. Oh, great. Well, no, he's, I guess for some people that may not know, our premier here in Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, recently raised the minimum wage by about 22%. Bumping it up to $14 an hour from $11.20, and I think Shep and service dogs like him, working dogs, have been overlooked.
Yeah, well, Shep's a retired police dog who lives with his friend and his hippie girlfriend somewhere over on Woodbine Avenue, and he's done some really biting stories for the paper, and people go, "Oh, well, who's Shep the Talking?" Well, Shep's the talking dog, and people have a hard time believing that, but I don't know what to tell them.
Well, it's just more evidence that your ward news is a really enlightened kind of publication.
And satirical publication, exactly. Who else
and not only that, but more progressive than any other. But and I also wanted to talk to you a bit about your write-up on Jordan Peterson in the latest issue too. I thought that was
Jordan Peterson and the dreaded JQ.
Yeah, and I liked your write-up on it, because every time I've read something about Jordan Peterson and the JQ, whether it be a tweet or an article or a blog.
Well, the funny thing about that is the day after I wrote that article, Jordan Peterson put out an article on his blog site explaining why he took the position that he did, though he never referenced my article in it. So I'm almost 100% sure that he read the article, and that's why he responded to it. But basically, what that story was about was it was Jordan Peterson's own followers that sort of found his kryptonite. In my opinion, I like Jordan Peterson. I asked him a question in a news scrum one time, and though I didn't get the answer that I wanted or expected, I thought his answer was very thoughtful and honest. Personally, I like Jordan Peterson, but I have seen him screw the pooch, as Shep would say, on 2 occasions. One was when they had to reschedule that panel discussion. Originally, they had a panel discussion with Gad Saad and Oren
Amate, another psychologist.
And Goldie, Faith Goldie.
Yeah.
Now, Faith Goldie, and they had to cancel that or reschedule that that show because of Antifa protesting on the Ryerson campus. So they rescheduled that series of talks for a couple of months later. And in between that time, Faith Goldie had covered the Charlottesville protests and lost her job at Rebel Media because she covered that. And oddly enough, she was the one that actually got the film of that person being hit by the car.
Yeah.
And it was a great piece of film. It was used by media all over the world, and yet Rebel Media fired her for covering the Charlottesville protest.
Yeah.
Which, in my opinion, was a real douchebag move on the part of Ezra Levant.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was a douchebag move, and also I thought it was a very unwise decision on Ezra's part too, because Faith was probably one of their best and most popular broadcasters.
Well, he's the editor, and that's his decision to make.
Absolutely. But I also felt a bit bad for Faith Goldie because she wasn't. It kind of got made out to seem like she was down there with a tiki torch, But I watched her footage, and she was just doing her work as a journalist. Really, she was just there covering the events, talking to people, and it was like just a wild coincidence or stroke of bad luck that she happened to be where she was when the hit and run or the car.
Well, that wasn't what the media made it out to be either.
No, not at all.
They made that out to be right-wing violence, when the truth of the matter is that it was left-wing violence that caused that whole scene in the first place. What they don't show you is that this guy's car was being attacked by Antifa that were hitting it and beating on his car, and the guy panicked and stepped on the gas, and that's what happened.
Yeah, well, and you kind of have to dig
to say this was right-wing violence, this was a Nazi trying to kill somebody, is ridiculous, and that's the way the media played the story.
Yeah, well, and sorry to keep on this side note, but yeah, you kind of have to dig for it. But if you look it up, apparently the follow-up to that car crash story was apparently the driver. Not only was he being intimidated and kind of harassed and stuff by Antifa, but apparently he had some serious mental conditions as well.
Apparently he was a schizophrenic, yeah.
Yeah, so it's to characterize it as, this was just some Nazi out to kill a peaceful leftist protester. It's just
and to top it off, he was half Jew. Apparently his mother's name was Bloom. He was half Jewish.
But yeah, anyway, so that was that kind of.
Anyway, but you see, that's not the point. The point we were talking about Jordan Peterson, right?
Yeah, that was the lead up or the backstory behind the first Jordan Peterson.
Right. So when they rescheduled this panel discussion, they dropped Faith Goldie from the panel discussion. And when somebody got up and asked Jordan Peterson, "Hey, where's Faith Goldie? Why did Jordan Peterson made some really lame excuse about her, going on a Daily Stormer podcast from the Charlottesville protests and not asking enough questions.
Yeah.
And it was lame. It was a lame excuse. And, he, as far as I'm concerned, that was the first time Jordan Peterson faltered. The second time Jordan Peterson faltered is when one of his supporters, I got to hand it to Jordan Peterson, too. He takes all questions from the audience, and he takes questions from the media. He'll answer anybody's question. And usually he'll stop and think for a moment before he opens his mouth. I've got huge respect for the guy. But the second time he screwed the pooch was when one of his own followers got up and quoted a recent novel by Solzhenitsyn, who Peterson refers to quite a bit, and basically asked him the Jewish question. And Peterson just said, I can't answer that. Didn't say why he wouldn't answer it, nothing, just left it hanging there.
Yeah, and, I saw that.
And that was the second time that, it was his kryptonite. It was a question that he couldn't honestly speak about and couldn't address why he couldn't speak about it. And it was one of his own followers that actually brought. So that was the basis of the article. It was Jordan Peterson and the dreaded Jewish question. And, people say, they point to that. And, I had some writer friends of mine. I had a friend of mine who's a prominent writer staying with me at the time, who turned around to me and said, I wouldn't use that wording. I wouldn't use Jewish question. And, people are afraid to address certain topics, right? And, if we're living in a free society and we have free speech, you should be able to talk about unpleasant things. And that's part of the problem of the society we're living in. Everybody is afraid. And frankly, I think people are getting tired of it. People are getting tired of saying, there's these topics that you can't broach. If you don't agree with transvestites, reading story time in kindergartens, then you're a bigot. Well,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Or even worse, if you don't agree with giving your, your prepubescent child hormones because they think they might be the opposite gender, then you're also a bigot. And that to me is
and people
terrifying.
Who come out and say, hey, that's child abuse, they should have a right to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a whole...
In my opinion, it is child abuse.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other topic that I could rant about for an hour probably. But I wanted to say,
these topics are stuff that we could expand on, forever.
Yeah.
It's hard to put all these topics into one.
I like the article you did on Jordan Peterson getting stumped by the Jewish question that was presented to him, because not only did you include the entire question, which a lot of other sources I'd seen hadn't. They'd kind of clipped off the front of it, which gives it its whole context. So I thought that was excellent to see. But also I liked the fact that you didn't really pass a judgment on his response either way. You just really laid out, exactly what it was that had led up to it and what had happened, and
left it hanging there just like Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was very well done. And like I said, almost everywhere else that I've seen that discussed, it's been very heavily editorialized for either defending Peterson for the way he handled it or vilifying him for the way he handled it. And so I thought that was really good, and I thought it.
Well, to me, it wasn't how Jordan Peterson handled the question, as much as it is why is it that nobody's allowed to speak the question.
Well, that's a good question. No, it's I think what it is. It's a taboo, obviously, and I think it's a taboo that I know has been around at least ever since I was a kid. The Holocaust
Second World War, anyway,
are probably the most tragic and horrible things you learn about growing up, and it cements it as a subject that's is kind of impolite and in bad taste to even talk about, and then to question.
But I'll tell you something. In that article, I think I handled it in a very accurate and mature way. And that's the point. I think we do cutting edge journalism in that newspaper. A lot of it is tongue in cheek and wacky zany sort of stuff. But a lot of it is cutting journalism as well. And I believe we have a right to publish. I think we should publish. I think more people should read the paper. Anybody listening to this, go to yourwordnews.ca and read our paper.
Absolutely.
Believe me.
Yes, everyone should check it out. And
of course, if you do, you're a Nazi.
Well, if you're listening to this in the first place, you've probably already become a Nazi if you weren't already, right? So
yeah, well, there you go.
Your fate's been sealed.
But you know what? Somebody did an article recently let's face it, there are no real Nazis anymore. I mean, what is a Nazi? A Nazi was, somebody who followed Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist Party of 1940 something. There are no real Nazis. And people who are running around calling everybody Nazis and fascists are the real Nazis and fascists of our society. And that's the so-called progressive left, or the regressive left, as I like to call them.
Yeah, well, and it's something that I mentioned too in our last talk, that this calling everyone a Nazi at the drop of a hat is kind of a more it's part of a more pernicious trend where just language doesn't really have the same depth of meaning anymore. It's like calling everybody a racist. Like the word means nothing anymore.
Well, they used to call me a conspiracy theorist. Before I was a Nazi, I was a conspiracy theorist because I wrote an article questioning, the 9/11 incident. Mm-hmm. And, that's it. You're either a conspiracy theorist or a Nazi. They'll always find some sort of label to dismiss the things you're talking about. And what you're talking about is not, we don't live in an echo chamber or a vacuum. The kind of stuff I talk about, there are a lot of people talking about, and they're questions that I think deserve a frank and adult discussion.
They do. And I mean, the more that, it's part of the struggle of it all, but it's also, I think, will work out for the best in the end, because it's like any kind of prohibition, right? The more you try to suppress something, the more powerful it becomes in a lot of ways. And the more people start to become interested, too. I mean, it's like a little kid. If you tell them they can't look in that drawer, the first thing they want to do is look in the drawer, right? So.
Well, that's one of the arguments they use of our newspaper. Oh, I'm afraid to send my child to the mailbox to get the mail now, because what if he saw that?
Jesus.
Oh, no, that's been said more than once. That's one of the main tenets that these lefties are using against us. What if my child saw that?
Oh, someone please think of the children.
Yeah, exactly. They used to say the same thing about Mad Magazine when I was a kid. Oh, well, your children shouldn't be reading that garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when is the next issue due?
Sometime in June, I believe.
Okay. So we're coming up to the summer issue.
I'm behind in my deadline now. I should be writing right now, and I haven't even started yet. So.
All right. Well, are there any other projects that you've been working on lately, or?
I've already seen the graphics for the front page, and it's going to be a real good one.
Oh, good. It'll be a zinger.
I can't talk about it. It's hush hush, but I've seen the front page, and it's going to be a zinger.
Excellent. Well, yeah, no spoilers, but definitely know that it's on the way. That's good. Is there any other things around town or projects you're
other than the elections, which I like to get my feet wet in. I'm working with certain candidates that are running for office, but other than that, these days I'm mostly just making my little films and writing for the paper and trying not to get arrested like my editor and publisher have been doing.
Yeah, let's keep you free from trouble with the law. That would be good.
Well, I think they want me. It's just that I never leave the house, so it's hard to get me.
Good thing we're not in the UK, or they'd have got you already.
Well, it's hard to subpoena somebody when they won't walk out their front door, right?
Yeah, make it challenging for them.
Exactly. So Warren Kinsella's had a really hard time, giving me those papers. So there you go. He tried emailing them to me, but I wouldn't open the package.
Oh, yeah. You just
last thing I'm going to do is open an attachment that's sent to me by an idiot like that.
Yeah, really.
But, it's like I said, when when she decided at the last minute not to run for office and used us as an excuse, I laughed the whole afternoon. I did.
Well, I could imagine. I mean, that's
take this
just
so seriously, like we're such dangerous people, right? And the truth of the matter is that somebody who's going around pushing the type of philosophy that's run rampant through our universities and now our government like a cancer.
Yeah.
People like Warren Kinsella and Justin Trudeau, these are the really dangerous people, not the people that say the king has no clothes.
Yeah, well, Trudeau, I mean, there's another podcast too.
Yeah, I could go on another hour about our friend Justin Trudeau, but read the articles I've written about him. yourwordnews.ca.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Lawrence. Lawrence,
well, thank you so much for having me on. I could have gone on for another hour. There are other topics we could have covered. Maybe another time.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do this again in another month or two. That would be great. And I'm gonna get it out there too that Lawrence has the patience of a saint with me. We tried to do this last week, and I botched the audio. So big thanks to